welcome to my beginner's tips for Posca pin users. If you clicked on this video, that means you are curious as to what paper to use, what size pin to buy, or in general, how the heck you use Posca pins. So let's get into it. These are 10 tips for beginner Posca pin users. So what are Posca pins? Posca pins, or poster color paint markers, were launched in the early 80s by the Japanese company Mitsubishi Pencil. I was surprised to find this out because I feel like they've become quite a fad in the art community in the last few years. I especially never saw them in my local art stores until the last year. They are especially popular, according to their website, with graffiti. And honestly, I had no idea that that's where they originated. They are an odorless water-based pigment paint, whatever that means. I also found out while doing research for this video that they have 55 dang colors. Now I am desperate to get more of these greens and yellows, and I have no idea where to find them, so I will have to do more research and report back to you guys in the advanced tips video. Next up is, where can I buy Posca pins? This is probably the second most asked question about Posca pins. The answer of this question depends a lot on where you live. I can definitely say if you have access to Amazon.com or Amazon.ca or Amazon whatever, that is where I bought my first batch of Posca pins, and I bought a lot. Honestly, this is probably the cheapest way to get your hands on Posca pins. Mine were direct imports from Japan, so all of the packaging and names are in Japanese, which is fine by me because luckily I have studied Japanese so I can read them. But if you do prefer English branded Posca pins, you can also find those on Amazon as well. If you don't want to shop online and you are lucky enough to live in a city that has a nice art community, you can probably find a local art store where you can buy these Posca pins. To find your nearest art store, just Google search art store and you should get some results, nearby or far away. I do have 2 local art stores that have a nice big fat case of Posca pins, and they are so nice to let you look at the nib sizes and colors. My local shops have a little catalog where they are more than happy to show you samples, and it's a really good way to get a more hands-on feel for the Posca pins before you actually just blind buy them online. Our third tip is how to activate your Posca pins, or how to reactivate them if they have become watery. The cool thing about Posca pins, I mean, there are a lot of cool things about Posca pins, but something I've noticed about them that I haven't seen from any other art supply is that they include instructions on the pin themselves. Something I didn't even know about Posca pins is how to unpackage them. I always use a knife to take the plastic off. But thanks to the comments from my lovely subscribers, I found out that if you twist the top with the plastic on, it comes right off. It's so cool. So thanks, y'all. Japan loves their packaging, so of course each pin is wrapped in plastic, which is kind of annoying, but what can you do? After taking the plastic off of your Posca pin, you can see the instructions on your Posca pin barrel. It says, shake it up real nice and good. Get that ball irritating that paint or whatever. After giving it a good little shake, start pumping the tip. This way it activates the pin into the paint itself. Otherwise, the paint is not going to come out on its own by shaking, because otherwise the paint would activate while in shipment. So continue pumping the pin until the paint starts coming out to the nib. You can also shake during this process if you prefer, but pumping also works. You will not damage the nib, do not worry. These are sturdy nibs. When your nib has been completely covered in paint, you are good to go and you can start painting with your Posca pins. And that's how you activate your Posca pins. If you notice later on that your Posca pin has become watery or transparent, just give them a really long, nice shake to activate the paint and get it stirred up. I've noticed if I haven't used my Posca pins for a very long time, they do seem to settle and separate. Sometimes a good shake works. Sometimes you do have to scribble around with them until they become a little bit more opaque. Sometimes I get to the end of my illustration and it's not until then that they become opaque and I have to go back over the rest of it to make it all nice and opaque. But I'm not a professional about Posca pins, but sometimes you just kind of have to work with them to get them to do what you want. Tip number 4 is how to store your Posca pins. Do you store them vertically? Do you store them horizontally? Posca pins can be stored in either a vertical or a horizontal position. This includes right side up and even upside down. So according to the Posca themselves, the only pin that should be stored in a horizontal position is the brush nib. I would assume this is because it's more of an open-ended nib and it's probably prone to leaking, but I can only assume because they don't say why. Tip number 5 is the number one asked question ever. What paper should I use with Posca pins? According to the Posca Pin website, Posca pins work fantastic with any paper product, but to be honest, I find this hard to believe. The question I get the most out of any is, which paper should I use with Posca pins? My paper always pills or gets torn up. That's because, well, Posca pins just aren't, in my opinion, made for paper. Like, at all. They even say the main use for them is graffiti or crafts, which means they are more compatible with materials like cardboard, wood, plastics, rocks, ceramics, glass, fabric, metal, canvas, etc. Basically anything that can't be torn up like paper can. It has nothing to do with the paint itself and everything to do with the nib, I assume. It's just too rough. But to be honest, I don't really mind this. I just use as few strokes as possible to not overwork the paper and to tear it as little as I can. Pilling is going to happen, so you just have to accept that if you want to work on paper. Personally, I think it's worth it because I just love the effects you can get with Posca pins. They're just so bold and fun to play with. If you are wondering what paper I use, I normally use 140-pound hot press watercolor paper. I just find it is very thick and a little bit more durable, and the less texture I think to be torn up, the better. Hot press is a non-textured watercolor paper, while cold press has a lot more texture. Our 6th tip is how to use different nibs and their techniques. The reason why Posca pins come in such a variety of sizes is because each one can be used to its advantage. Which sizes you buy is up to you and your personal need, and I feel like owning every size of every color is overkill. For example, I usually only use the darker, brighter colors for line work and not so much the lighter ones. So I don't own colors like yellow or orange in the smallest size because I don't intend to make line art with them. If I need them in the future, I could always just go out and buy them, but I don't see a reason to stock every single size in every single color. Especially because how expensive they are. Real quick, I will show you a few of the uses for the variety of nib sizes. For lining my work, I usually use a 1M, but I recently got my hands on a 1MR. I feel like for lining my artwork, the smaller the better because I have more control. For putting down base colors, I like to use my 3M and filling in anything like a 5M or bigger, or basically whatever fits the size I am trying to fill in works. If I want to put down big fat blocks of color, the 17K works great for that, as well as the 8K. Posca pins also come in a small range of metallic and fluorescent colors. I don't own any fluorescent because not a fan of fluorescent colors, but you never know when you might need a little shine to your artwork. And of course, a brush nib can come in handy if you ever want a varying thickness to your line art. And also, I find it really fun to play around with the dry brushing technique, which basically just means go really fast so the ink can't keep up with the brush. But not only that, you can also flick the nibs of the brush pen, and you can also blow on them to create a really nice splattering effect. There's a lot of different techniques you can do with Posca pins, and playing around with them is just the best way to figure it out and just see what you can do. Tip 7 is which size and colors are best for beginners. According to the Posca pin website, the 3M size, quote, adapts to all types of creation, whatever that means. I did find myself picking up a few packs of 3M when I started off and found them to be a really good middle ground when working with my style of illustration. So it really just depends on what you are doing with them and at what size. I would only suggest a size up for filling in blocks of color or a size down when lining your works. Otherwise, you'll end up with a size that isn't fit for the job. For instance, you really don't want to fill in a block of color with the smallest size because it's torture. Likewise, you don't want to use the biggest, fattest nib to do your tiny, intricate work because again, torture. If you are wondering about what colors to start with, I would suggest looking through your artwork overall and seeing what 3 or so colors you work with the most and getting those in a 3M size. Try them out, illustrate some limited color illustrations, and see what you think of them. If you like them, great, buy more. If you don't, great. You only wasted a few bucks, maybe give them to a friend or something, or whatever you want. I don't know, it's your life. Next tip. Tip 8, how to avoid splattering. I noticed this particular issue while I was lining a piece one day. I was inking away when suddenly, splatter. Just like any brush, pen, or marker, Poscas have a certain direction that is preferred to work in, as in you make your marks in the direction that the fibers of the nib flow in. If you work with the flow of the nib, everything should be smooth. If you start to go against the flow of the nib, you are going to find that the marker jumps and starts to splatter as it creates friction on the surface you are working on. This isn't a Posca exclusive problem. Have you ever written on a chalkboard with chalk, or in general tried to use a pen or brush in the opposite way that the bristles flow? Same deal. Try to move the pen in the direction you are working and you should be able to avoid the splatters. Tip number 9, how to color without streaks. One of the best features about Posca pens is the ability to create a nice, solid, flat block of color. It's basically because of the opaqueness of the paint that allows for such smooth application. But what is the best way? Overall, you shouldn't have any issues with applying the paint without streaks, but if you are having issues, it's most likely caused by the paint becoming watery. As we covered before, just violently shaking the pen for as long as it takes until the paint becomes opaque again should allow the paint to start flowing properly. If this isn't your issue, I would suggest just painting in small circles, or what I do is block out sections and painting in long lines. This way it just becomes easier to tackle a large space, especially with a nib too small for the job. And our final beginner tip, tip number 10, prevent the pen from dripping. I've heard some people like to use Posca pens while pressing down, which sounds great in theory and honestly I never thought about, but also kind of sounds terrifying because then you're pressing down for a long period of time, which sounds painful. You would think this keeps the pen hydrated, right? But to be honest, this is a huge risk of overhydrating your pen and causing it to drip and leak all over your creation, which would be bad, I think. So if you ever have issues of a leaky pen, I would suggest just shaking the excess paint out or just dabbing it with a paper towel. If this problem persists, take the nib out by just grabbing and tugging at it and seeing if maybe it is damaged in any way. But to be honest, I haven't actually had this issue. It was just a question that I got a lot. The only reason I could think is maybe a damaged nib, or something I've had issues with is over pumping. If you pump it too much, then the paint just suddenly gushes out. This should easily be fixed by just getting rid of the excess paint around the nib and then continuing on. And there you go, 10 tips for getting started with Posca pens. If you are looking for more advanced tips like how to create a gradient with Posca pens, how to mix colors, or how to shade, I will have 10 tips for advanced Posca pen users in the future, maybe sooner than later. I will most likely link it here at the end card. Either way, keep an eye out. I hope this was helpful in any way. My biggest tip will always be just play with the material, and don't forget, practice makes not perfect, but it makes something. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.